Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Crafting and Crime Daily. I'm Rebecca, your host, also known as Crafting Journey. And if you want to see what I'm crafting, watch my lives on Wednesday and Sunday. But today we're going to talk about day 12 of the Chad Daybell case. Yes, Chad Daybell is on trial for the murder of Tylee Ryan, JJ Vallow. Tylee was 17, JJ was 7 at the time that they were murdered. He's on trial for the conspiracy to commit those murders and the murder and conspiracy to commit the murder of Tammy Daybell, his wife at the time she died. Then he gets married a few weeks later. Yeah. So, and he's got some insurance fraud thrown in there for good measure, and they are after the death penalty for these charges. So Friday was half a day, but they got a lot of witnesses on Friday. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 witnesses. Yeah. Quick, on and off the stand. But interesting nonetheless. The first one was Steve Schultz. He is in the funeral business, but he was also neighbors in Arizona of Chad Daybell. He lived next door to him for 9 years. They attended the same LDS church. And he talked about they were both in the funeral business, he and Chad. Chad was a sextant, which means I had never heard of this. I mean, I've heard of it from Lori's trial, but before Lori's trial, I had never heard of this. So a sextant is someone that maintains the cemetery. He'll open the gravesite, close the gravesite, just stuff in the cemetery. So they're in the he's and this guy is in the funeral business. He was a funeral director. Yeah, he did the embalming and all that good stuff. Yeah. Oh, no thanks. So he said, Chad, good family that they're from. So Chad moves to Rexburg, and in October he hears from Chad. Hey, Tammy's dead. Can you help me with the funeral? Yikes. So he expressed to Mr. Schultz that he would like him to handle the funeral, that he wanted him to pick up Tammy's body, transport it back to Springfield, Utah, and have the funeral there. So this guy gets together with Chad's. Chad. All right, Tammy Daybell's sister's husband. They were friends. And they decide they're going to drive together down to Rexburg because he didn't really want to go by himself. And he said that, his name was Jason. So he said he and Jason, would have conversations on the way there. So he gets to Rexburg Sunday morning. And he said that he asked Chad, what happened? And Chad said she was having difficulty breathing and that the coroner said she died of an embolus. Now, Chad tells several people this. That is not how she died. And he wanted the funeral to be done as soon as possible. Can we have it on Monday? And the guy's like, oh, this is a little too soon, And he convinced him to do the viewing on Monday and the funeral on Tuesday. Because, it takes a little while I don't know what Chad's big rush was, because he wanted to go get married to Lori, but he wanted it done. Toot sweet. Let's get it done. Get her done. Anyway. And so this funeral director said, usually the average time from a death to a funeral is about 4 days. Sometimes up to a week. Now we know I'm more familiar with the Jewish faith because I'm grew up in Florida, where there's a lot of Jewish people. They have to have it within 24 hours. But this guy's, he's an LDS. So LDS average 4 days. No, toot sweet. ASAP. So when he gets there, he talks to him and he said, Chad's had a very business-like atmosphere. And he said, I don't want to drag this process out. Process. His wife's funeral process. And then again, he asked, and he says, well, she wasn't feeling well. And she had this chronic cough. Nobody else talks about a chronic cough. Nobody. So he said this was raising some red flags to him. So he actually goes to, Tammy's body was taken to a funeral home in Rexburg. So he goes to that funeral home where they've already started the embalming process. And while that's going on, he kind of examines the body and he says, I didn't really, just because these red flags were going off in my head, he says, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. So when the embalming's done, he puts Tammy's body in his vehicle and he and Jason go back to Springfield. And on the way back, they're talking about how strange his demeanor was and these red flags. And he looked at Jason, he goes, you think he killed her? Just saying. He said, I just felt a bit rushed. So when he gets back to his funeral home, again, because of his red flags, he examines the body again, and he still doesn't see anything that, caused any concern. Yeah. Really strange. So the next witness was a real estate broker. And boy, he was an interesting fellow. So on September 22nd, so he, again, another LDS member, same ward as Chad, and this is how he knew Chad. So Chad, he and Chad were friends. So he had picked up Chad at his home. And there was a lot of questioning on cross-examination about, did you go to church that morning? And he said, yeah, Chad and I were at church. And sometimes it can last up to several hours. But he said, we didn't, we got together, I picked him up at his home. It was in the afternoon. And Chad was already home. And I had already been home from church. And he said Chad was still in his, church shirt and pants, dress pants. But Chad had called him and said, I have somebody that wants to look at this 78-acre property. He's interested in developing the property. And this guy, the real estate broker, same thing as David Warwick, said, it's a Sunday. Can we do this tomorrow? Because Sunday is, the day of rest. You don't want to be out there doing business on Sunday. It's the day you go to church, you spend it with family, have dinners, So Chad says, no, he's leaving tomorrow. Can you just show him the property? He's like, okay. 78 acres, $700,000. You don't pass that up. So he goes and he picks up Chad, and then he drives out to the property. When he gets out there, already there in a separate vehicle is Alex Cox. And then in another vehicle that shows up is David Warwick, the guy that wanted to see the property, and Melanie Gibb. And then, so he said, well, we spent about 15 minutes. I got his phone number. And then after that, I had a follow-up phone call with him. And he said, no, I don't know if I'm really interested. And he said, I never heard from him after that. That was it. And it was really Chad pushing Warwick into seeing this property. We learned that from his testimony. Then on October 19th, the day that Tammy died, the bishop of the ward called Mr. Arnold, his name was Ron Arnold, called him, the real estate broker, and said, Tammy passed away. And he's like, what? Tammy passed away. So he and his wife, who testifies next, her name is Whitney Arnold, and they go over to his house to, be with him. And he said Chad was distraught. And they did not have any discussion about how he died, how she died. And then he said he didn't go to the funeral over in Springfield that was on Tuesday, but he did go to the memorial that was on Wednesday. At that memorial, he had a conversation with Chad, and Chad had told him he wasn't comfortable living in that house anymore, and that he would be staying with a friend. But also, he was going to go to Hawaii and help a friend write their biography. And he didn't think anything unusual because he knows Chad's in the publishing industry, and that's, it's part of his business. So he just figured it. But Chad had this all planned out. Yeah, he was going to marry Lori, go to Hawaii. Yeah. So then what, and I'm going to kind of combine the testimony of him and his wife. They would have, after Tammy died, their routine became every Monday they would invite Chad and the kids over for dinner, just so they could be with other people and talk and, work out their grief. So in November, later on, before it wasn't the first part of November, but it was before Thanksgiving, sometime in November on a Monday, she gets a call from her husband, the realtor, and he says, Chad's going to be bringing his wife to dinner tonight. His wife? Okay. And sure enough, here comes Chad and Lori for dinner. And so the conversation, just kind of normal conversation. Hi, hello, who are you? You got any kids? She has 7 kids. Okay. And I think when all is said and done, she did have 7 kids. I don't know if they were all biological or what, but I think if you actually count all the kids she had quite a few. So then in March of 2020, he was driving around with Chad. They were friends. So he's driving around with Chad, and Lori was already incarcerated, and Chad was asking him, can we split the property? I want to split the property. And he says, I don't think the zoning people are going to let you do that. And he goes, well, how about it? Can we put another home on the property? And what's the fastest way to do that? And this realtor said, well, it would take about 8 months to build a home, but the quickest way is just to put a modular home on there. And that'll probably get approved because you already have a separate septic on this property. So on cross-examination, you have to hear the question that John Pryor, the defense attorney, asked this realtor, Ron Arnold. They were, they're having this discussion regarding the property, and he asked him how many acres it is, and listen to his response.
Mentioned that you, on the 19th of 2019, you were over at Chad's house. Is that right?
What's the date?
October 19, 2019?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And when you were over there on October 19th of 2019, you're familiar with that house, right?
No, I have never been inside that house.
Oh.
I had been in the foyer, and they have a breezeway or an entryway, and that's as far as I'd ever been in that house.
Did you familiarize yourself with the property surrounding that house?
When we talked about splitting the property, it was about the acreage, not about the house or the floor plan or any of those kinds of things.
Okay, so the acreage that you're talking about, do you have any recollection of how much acreage we're talking around that surrounds Chad's house?
You own it. How many acres is it?
Well, I appreciate it. I don't know. Judge, could we have a sidebar?
Yes. All right. Thank you, counsel. We're back on the record. I had a sidebar with counsel regarding the last response from the witness. And I just want to instruct at this point, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the witness just provided what was essentially an unsolicited factual response in the case, and that answer has no relevance to the charges in this case or the guilt or innocence of the defendant. I'm going to instruct you to disregard that previous comment made by the witness, and on that fact, do not discuss that in any way in your deliberations or speculate about the previous answer. And I'll also instruct the witness to avoid mentioning that topic again. Mr. Pryor, with that in mind, then you can continue with your cross-examination.
Thank you, Judge.
Sidebar. This is where you ask for a mistrial, except nobody wants to try this case again. Nobody. So I'm sure they had to work out how we're going to deal with this. And that's why I let you hear what the judge had to say. Just don't talk about it again. Don't bring it up again. But interesting. John Pryor owns that property now. Is this how he paid for his legal fees? You can have my house and my 4 acres in Rexburg. It's a great deal because Jesus is coming there. Okay. Sold. Alrighty. So then he acknowledged that, now looking back on it, maybe Chad wanted to put a modular home on that property for a whole different reason. Maybe he was trying to just cover up those bodies. Yeah, interesting. So Whitney Arnold was next, Ron's wife. She also learned of Tammy's death on October 19th when the bishop called. She and her husband went over there. She said Chad wasn't showing a lot of emotion, but she didn't feel like that was out of the ordinary because everybody grieves differently. They didn't discuss how she died. She asked, "Are you going to do an autopsy?" And he said no. And then she looked at him, and then she looked at the kids because they were there. Four of the 5 children were there. And she said, "But what if it was something, genetic and it might pass down to your girls or your children? You sure you don't want an autopsy?" And they're like, "No." The first responders know how she died. They've got a pretty good handle on how she died. Okay. So the next person on the stand was a guy named Craig Huff. This is a guy very friendly with Chad, another member of the LDS Church. He was actually at one time the bishop of the ward and had appointed Chad as his executive secretary. So he said they were pretty close. And this was when they were in Springfield, Utah. So he attended this service that was held Tuesday in Springfield and had a conversation with Chad Daybell. And Chad didn't really give a reason why she died, but as he's going through the funeral line, I guess, where you greet Chad, he said, he looked at Chad and Chad broke down crying and he broke down crying. And he said he felt like it was really genuinely upset about this. It was genuine. So the Saturday after the funeral, he goes down to Rexburg because he's got children that live in Rexburg. And he meets Chad at a restaurant. They're going to have a meal. And Chad tells him, "We had a miracle. This miracle happened a week before Tammy died. I got all her passwords." Now, apparently, she handled all the finances in the house. So somehow a week before she dies, he gets all her passwords. And this is a miracle. Okay. Then the final person on the stand was Richard Garner. He is the principal of Sugar City Elementary, where Tammy Daybell worked, and as a librarian. And he described her as being very active, very energetic, very healthy, always taking on extra tasks. She was supposed to be the librarian, but she would do something in the lunchroom with the kids, and she was always taking the kids to the classes and bringing them back. He says the only time I ever saw her sitting down was during her lunch break. She never took any sick days. And she was there a year and a half, never took any sick days. Then on September 7th of 2019, so 5 or 6 weeks before he died, he said he was working out in the yard and he heard some music over in the park. They live near a park. And so he said to his wife, let's ride over on our bikes and see what's going on. So they go over there and there's a 5K going on. And he's talking, there was a friend of his over there and that he ran into, and they're talking to them. And he sees Tammy Daybell and Emma, her daughter, crossing the finish line. So he goes over and has a conversation with them. And he says, nothing out of the ordinary. He says, I used to coach track and I didn't see anything that caused me any concern. She's drinking her water and she was fine, Yeah, so he gets how he learned of Tammy's death was he got a text from a former teacher, and the text said, "We lost Tammy." So his initial thought was, she quit. She's leaving. She's going to another school. And he's like, oh my God, how am I going to replace her? And then he thought, well, maybe she just meant for a week or so, so he actually calls the person that texted him, and he couldn't remember the name, but he called the person that texted him, and they said, no, she passed away. So he goes over to visit Emma, because Emma worked at the school as well. And he has a conversation with Chad, and Chad is saying, we're going to have the funeral in Springfield on Tuesday. And he goes, well, I've got a lot of people, like half the school is going to want to go to this thing, including me. And that's kind of quick. And, are you going to do anything here so everybody can go? And, like maybe a memorial or something. And so Chad's like, so Emma calls him later on, and Emma says, yeah, we want to do a memorial. We're going to do it on Wednesday. And then ends up like turfing it over to this principal to plan the whole thing. He had to go pick up the programs and yeah. So he said Chad was absolutely no help with the logistics for this memorial service. No help at all. So that is where we leave off. Was that the end of the testimony? I don't think I took any more notes. That was it for the day. So it ended before lunch, and then the jury will be back in court today. So I will bring you up to speed tomorrow in Crafting and Crime Daily. Is that all? Is that it? Okay. Yeah, that's it. Have a great day, everybody. I will see you tomorrow in Crafting and Crime Daily. Bye.